Hello YouTube. This video is called How to Budget and Buy a Drift Car in 2024 or something like that. So what we're gonna go over is basically, I made a video 4 years ago or so before I had a dad bod and I was skinnier and younger looking, and it was all about how to buy a drift car depending on what type of person you are, by what type of budget, where you live in the world, access to cars, all these different things. And we're gonna update that video, and I'm gonna kind of redo the whole video, but we're gonna very first start off with what has changed and what it's gonna be like buying a car now and in the future. And I'm just gonna kind of introduce you to some concepts real quickly, so let's get started. So first of all, we're trying to build and buy and all this stuff a drift car. You want a drift car. The first thing to understand is it is now 2023 and we're going into 2024, and things have changed. In the past couple decades, when I got into drifting, which was right around like 2001 to 2003, our favorite cars, which were say 240SXs or JZXs or like E36 M3s, they'd started off somewhere in the $30,000 to $20,000 range, and they were on a huge depreciation curve. And what made them awesome is we were grabbing these cars such as E36 M3s at that time period, somewhere around there, and a little bit later down here. We were grabbing 240SXs down here to almost free JZX 100s during that time period, or a little bit later. They had, wherever they were falling down here. You could buy a manual transmission JZX 100 in Japan or an R32 Skyline, things like that, way down here on the depreciation curve. And depending where you were and what part of the world, you'd be buying something in America in that range, but not like a Japanese like JZX 100 in that range here. And you'd be getting a Mustang or a 240SX or things like that. And say in Japan, you'd be getting those other cars that were really cool, crazy cheap, but not Mustangs or whatever. So anyways, we were riding a depreciation curve of our local cars because they started out high, they went low. Throughout this region was the sweet spot because the cars aren't completely worn out yet. They're just depreciated enough that normal people don't want them. They're reliable, they're super sweet, great cars. And now we've kind of ridden this curve out and we're heading back up. And some of those cars that we were talking about, say E36 M3s, they might be somewhere around the 15K mark for a decent one now. A really nice one might be up here. JZX 100s really took the swing in America and Japan. In Japan, they might be 15. In America, they're somewhere between probably 20 and 30 for a decent car. So where we are right now, 4 years ago, a lot of these cars were in this region down here. And we are now heading up into this region where a lot of the cars that we're used to, such as 350Zs might still be a little bit low, but E36 M3s, A86s with decent motors in them. What else? JZX 100s. Lots of these cars have ridden back up and they're heading into the classic mark. And the crappy thing about this area is some of these cars like the JZX 100s might still be a fun drift car, and it might still be within the budget of a lot of us in this region. But as we get away from here, there's tons of like parts availability and junkyards and just cars being parted out because they're worthless heading down. You get into parts being really expensive heading back up. Suddenly an interior part here is free, or a window switch is free, or a windshield is free, or really cheap, or doors are $100. Then you start heading up where you're looking for a simple part for $1,000. RX-7 FDs have been in that price range like for weird stuff for a long time because they're limited in the US. All right, so that's kind of where we are right now. The reasons that this is happening right now from COVID is because, man, the economy's weird. Things are getting expensive, but these are limited things. Like you can't just go have GK Tech make you an entire car. BMW is not going to remake a car. The cars are getting worn out, they're getting old, they're getting classic. People are now collecting them for various reasons. They're not building so many manual transmission cars, so there's no longer cheap manual transmission BMWs that have a differential like an LSD from the factory and all these things replacing like the E36 M3 or even the E46 cars and everything else. So since there's not a plethora of cars coming down that wave, the other cars are going up and they're getting expensive. And this kind of was like the golden age of Japanese drifting where everything was cheap. And then America has been like that for the last 2 decades, although we didn't realize it for a while. And now we're kind of heading back up. So And the concept of how to buy a car in 2023 and beyond in 2024 for drifting, we have to kind of understand this depreciation curve, what it means, what can we buy that's now in this sweet spot, or do we even care and we want to drift like a classic drift car? Do we want to build, like, say, if you're building from a shell, say like a BMW shell, an E36 shell or something like that, and you're building a V8 car or a JZ car, whatever it is, doesn't really matter because you're still in junkyard status and those cars are not collectible like the shells, you know, that you might be using. So it still might be really cheap. Same thing with S13s. A mint condition S13 or S14 could be way up here, but a cheap garbage one that's caged or something because it's not collectible might be really low still. So you could do that stuff. But ideally what we're gonna be doing is identifying cars that still might be cheap within this range. Those cars could be that I see, but they're rare. Could be like an E90 330i, if they made those, or 328s with a manual transmission. I bought a couple recently, or one recently for $2,000, I think. I don't remember what it was. And then we put some money into it and we were gonna drift it. I saw one today online for $3,000 because I was kind of researching this video. You can still find some of the E90s for pretty cheap, but then they go into the turbo motors. Almost everything is automatic after that point, and you stop having availability. So there are some cheap stuff, they're just really rare. 350Zs are still within this range, although they're kind of trending up. Mustangs, because they built so many of them in America, you can still buy Mustangs very cheap. And then those other cars like the JZX100s, the M specific cars like the E46 M3 and E40 or E36 M3, they're heading up. S15s and stuff just like shot right off the map, and RX-7s and things like that. All the manual transmission cars that are classics are just kind of shooting off. If you go to Facebook Marketplace and search by BMW and just look at every BMW you can, and then manual transmission, and then look for cars that possibly might have like an LSD from the factory or a non-garbage motor that's not like a 4-cylinder Z3 or something like that, there's really not that many manual transmission cars. Parts are getting not super available. Most of those cars are super worn out now. Everything once they're over here is getting really worn out. The simple cars, such as the E36s and stuff like that, they're just not being, there's not many of them left. And the newer ones are too complex. So even if you're in this range on, you know, like, I don't even know some of the chassis codes, but say a 2015 328 4-cylinder turbo, and you could find one that's a manual transmission or something like that, it can be very difficult to make work for drifting. Such as the new Supras, they might actually get somewhere in this range, but I was talking to TJ Hunt, and like, you almost have to put a standalone ECU on those things, which are very expensive and would be difficult to tune and get set up and everything. You would almost have to do something crazy like that to make one of those drift. Or at least that's what he said. I don't really have much firsthand experience with him, which puts you in a very odd place because the car is so complex. It's not like we're used to just go grab a car and unplug a wheel speed sensor to fool the ABS or something really easy. You suddenly start having to code things out and change ECUs just to make the car allow you to control it. And then I made a note for myself. Why we loved the cars we loved was because they were cheap. When I got into drifting, all the cars that we love, such as E36s, and like we developed an affinity for S chassis, you know, a lot of this stuff, the JZXs and the Skylines, it's not that they were great cars. A lot of them were not great cars, and their lineages kind of got killed for whatever reason. They were cheap cars, and they're rear-wheel drive. They had differentials available for them, like LSDs, and somewhat of an aftermarket. And they were built in very large quantities most of the time. So cars we loved, and I'm talking about today, were simply cars that, like, we don't really talk too much about drifting Mark IV Supras because they were never cheap enough for the most part for us to deal with them in turbo form. We don't talk about drifting like an Aston Martin or like most Mercedes things or anything else because in America, they were too expensive to mess with, which meant we never fell in love with these cars. So it's important to remember this depreciation curve was very important because the cars that we learned to love fell within a ratio where Juku Racing and all these parts companies started to make parts for the cars because there were so many of them in large quantities of chassis for people to pick up and do stuff with, that they could build parts and make enough of them to sell. Because like you would never get enough parts for an SL500 Mercedes to be a viable drift car probably. You'd have to like fabricate everything and make it. So anyways, we fell within the sweet spot of cheapness of the car, huge production numbers of like 180,000 S chassis or something like that. And just all these variables that came together, same with the E36 M3s, that made everything work. And cool, let's go to the next topic. I think you understand the depreciation curve and all that stuff. Where you want to be necessarily, I typically want to be somewhere within this range if possible. I do not want to be on, I mean like this range is still fine, but I don't really want to be up here. That means you're in a JZX 100, and if you mess up a fender and you want a stock fender or a stock door or anything, you could be paying $1,000 for a fender. I would prefer to be over here where we were in E36 territory all the way through there, where an E36 fender was literally free or $50, making it like a good bash car that you could have fun with. However, I will add one more thing before I get off this topic. Once you get over here and say you have a JZX 100, which is really nice, you take care of it. If you had, say, a JZX 100 and you had the exact same car and it had 20,000 miles on it or 200,000 miles on it, and it was the exact same car, but the odometer just had different readings on it kind of thing. If someone saw this car and it had 200,000 miles on it, they would just treat it like a car, beat on it, not care about it so much, blah, blah, blah. But if it had 20,000 miles on it, someone would immediately think of it as a collector car and take such good care of it and not destroy it. And this car might last another 20 years where this one might last a few. So if you're in here somewhere, and even if you drift it, you're probably gonna take excellent care of it. And it's not a bad thing to have a nice car, even if it's old, because you're gonna take care of it. Probably won't cost you a ton of money because it's a reliable JZX 100. You're not gonna beat on it too much. It's not a terrifying place to be at a $30,000 JZX. Even though in my brain, I bought a dozen of them for $2,000, which I actually had. So anyways, I was gonna say, you don't need to be afraid of where you are anywhere in this curve. I actually did buy a brand new 350Z back in 2005. It was one of my best drift cars ever, and it hardly ever broke or did anything. It was actually very cheap to operate, and then I sold it, and it was probably buying a brand new 350Z way cheaper than running my S13 that had an SR20 in it because the thing broke. Turbo motors are super expensive. So kind of weird thing to think about. Okay, we're scooting right along. We've talked about depreciation curve and everything. Now it's time to talk about a bunch of different subjects we're gonna push you in, that will push you into what type of car, and then we're gonna start dialing it into the exact car that might work for you. And I'm just gonna, this is all thought process. So let's start off here. Are you a mechanic? If the answer is, I am a mechanic, you could build a custom car with any body, with any engine, and you could build high horsepower, low horsepower, lightweight, heavy car. You could build a four-door car that's caged with seats in the back. You could build something with a twin turbo V8. You could build something like a Corolla that's tiny with the S2000 motor that's light, that's gonna get great tire wear. You could build tons of different cars, but you are going to be possibly building something. You don't have to, because then if you could build something crazy like that, you could end up with a really crazy car, really reliable car, very neat car that's a race car that's easy to work on, where everything is accessible. But if you build something like that, you will need a truck and trailer. And if you are not a mechanic, you should completely stay away from all that custom stuff. And you should probably get something that's a tried and true, simple bolt-on car so that you can drive as much as you want. If you do want to someday have mechanical skills, a drift car, even if it is super close to stock, is still going to teach you how to work on a car. You will still be changing out a clutch. You'll still be doing a starter. You'll still be putting a different battery in there, getting it tuned, changing control arms, aligning the car, setting up suspension, things like that. So the types of cars you'll have if you are not a mechanic, or if you are a mechanic, but you kind of, if you're not a mechanic, you really need to stay to this stuff, is 350Z, BMW, Mustang, FRS. You could have a Corvette, although a Corvette is kind of difficult to work on, and if you take it to a shop, it could get really expensive. But most of these other cars are fairly easy to maintain. You start to get to the Corvette, it is a bit more difficult to maintain. But these all have available bolt-on parts. They all come rear-wheel drive, They all have adjustable control arms that you can buy. They all have available differentials, which isn't some crazy thing you have to reinvent the wheel to do. They all have angle kits available to them, which is important. They all have bolt-on hydro solutions, or in the case of like a BMW, the stock handbrake works pretty well. They all have chassis that have like models that have available engines that will work for drifting, such as 350Zs just have decent engines. The BMWs have M versions, or they have like the 330i. They'll have a decent size N96. The Mustangs come with V8 versions. The FRS is just crappy engine, but it'll still work. And the Corvettes obviously have rad engines. Okay, so that's kind of, are you a mechanic? Be honest with yourself. You will still learn to work on cars if you do choose something like that. But if you go into this realm and you're not a mechanic, or even if you are, but it's hard to say because I don't want to be judgmental, but very few people are good enough mechanics to do this kind of stuff unless they're like a full-blown shop. The custom stuff could take you literally years to build. We have plenty of people that came out to do Lone Star Drift events or other events around the country. They wanted to build some ultimate cool doomsday car. They spent 4 years in their garage building something. Then they have a kid and they knock themselves out and they never drove. I would say that's a fairly high ratio of cars, if they're high build stuff, whatever level, that never see the light of day. Let's talk about if you have a family. If you do have a family, you have no free time, you probably need something like this. If you don't have a family, you have plenty of free time and you can kind of do whatever you want. But be honest with yourself. If you have a family, there's no way if you have like a 6-month-old kid or 3 kids that you're going to be building some car that takes 1,000 hours to finish, and then also get away for weekends and operate it and everything. Get something that will allow you to spend time with your family, and then you will still have plenty of time to spend with the car. Some people just love building cars, by the way, so they could just build a drift car forever and not really operate it, but just know that's what you're doing, is you'll be in the build state forever. And then really does help when you don't have, when you have plenty of free time and you're young, then sky's the limit. Go build an SR car with 4 of your friends, and you guys learn and experience things, learn the pain of building a car. Kind of fun. Let's go over to tracks real quick. Know your local tracks. Do not build a car for a track that you're gonna drive once every 2 years or something like that. Build a car for the tracks that you're around. So if you're around kart tracks, such as my other video, I talked about Pat's Acres, local tracks of that size that are like kart tracks. Build a car that's simple for that. An E36 M3 would have been, super great for that. 350Z, an FRS would be fine for that. Really focus on the tracks that you're actually going to drive a lot, and don't build too much of a car for it. You're just going to break parts, go through too many consumables. It's not really necessary. Just know the track that you're at. But if you only have big tracks around you, Texas has a lot of big tracks, you're going to want a car that has more power than probably an FRS, like an HR350Z. Maybe you end up with a Pro-Am car like a V8 240SX or something like that. But just know that you will want a car that can do every track. And realistically, a 370Z or a 350Z will even do big tracks. So don't be too afraid of having something like that. But if you have it at huge tracks, you probably don't want a 100 horsepower Corolla. Although most modern cars have quite a bit of power compared to like what we had 20 years ago, especially with modern tuning and everything else. Location, know your location. If you're in the United States, Europe, or Japan, try and probably take advantage of the local cars. Unless you're just a collector and you want something like, say, a JZX 100 and you live in America, just know that that's going to cost you a ton of money. It's really going to slow you down for parts availability. If you need a windshield or something like that, it could cause you 6 months trying to get that thing. It could be broken in shipping and you start the whole process over again. Just know that you will be spending a lot of extra money and time and effort and shipping and everything, which might be totally your thing, if you're buying a car from out of region. So the United States, again, most of these cars are great for that list. In Japan, you have Silvias, JZX, things of that nature. They're not going to be drifting Corvettes and Mustangs and stuff like that over in Japan because you just wouldn't have the parts availability. It would cost multiple times the money to do than your local cars. So unless you're just a collector and you really want to do kind of like that kind of stuff, focus on the cars from your region and take advantage of that depreciation curve, the availability of parts, and just like what makes your country great, and lean into that, because it sucks trying to be super unique and just struggling because you can't get parts ever. And if you break during a track day, and you're in a 350Z, you could probably be going that same day within an hour or two, just walking around the pits asking for parts. But if you were to break a super unique part on some Cosmo or something weird at a drift event, that's knocking you out for months. So just know the location where you are and the cars that you'll be choosing from. And then be very honest with yourself with a truck and trailer. If you do have a crazy custom car, you're gonna end up needing a truck and trailer. If you gut out your car too much and rip out the AC, or like you drive it too hard and bash it to bits and stuff, you will probably need a truck and trailer it. Some countries, they don't allow you to drive super modified cars. You probably need some way to get to the track and stuff. So just be aware of that. If you do need a truck and trailer, that means you need garage space for it, outside space. You'll need, sometimes too, trucks can be too expensive to daily and everything if you have a big commute. You might need a daily, and then a truck, a trailer, and then your drift car. And if you're in an apartment building, there's no way all that's gonna work. So you'd be much better off just spending your money on one car that's dailyable, or maybe have a daily and that car and forego the truck and trailer. And if you ever do break at the track, which might be once every 5 track days, one of your buddies could bring it back. You could leave it at the track, go back and fix it, or you could even just call a tow truck and it probably wouldn't be that expensive. So just be super honest with truck and trailer, because that should really inform your stuff. And if you can barely afford to have your car going with, you know, a different body and engine swap and all this stuff, there's no way you're gonna have a truck, trailer, insurance, all that stuff, and then also the garage space to build everything. So let's jump over to money for a second. Be really honest with yourself how much money you have. If you have tons of money, you could have a shop build the car, you can have them maintain it, you could have track support from that shop, or someone come and support you at the track. You can deal with obsessive, like crazy tire wear. Obsessive? No. Excessive, that's the word. And consumables can be crazy. You could run C16 race gas or something. You'll start getting into fuels. You'll see some people at the track spending $500 a weekend just running fuels. They can afford more garage space and storage space. And then family time and stuff. If you have money, you can kind of have a family and have family time with them and offset all that stuff over to someone else, because you can have somebody else maintain your car and do stuff. If you don't have a lot of money, you need to be honest. You probably won't have a lot of garage space, street space. You probably won't have a truck and trailer and all these extra things. You probably won't have somebody else to work on your car. It means you probably shouldn't be beholden to like a tuner for whenever your car has tuning issues because it's a crazy turbo car. You don't want to be beholden to someone to help you fabricate every time you have a little problem. If you have a 350Z and you get in a slight wreck, your friends can just like pull it out with a winch cable or like on a tree or come along or whatever and get like a factory bash bar back on there that you pick up for like 50 or $100. But if you had like a super race car thing that had to go to some fabrication shop and you're beholden to someone to always bend up tubes and fix things or whatever, this can get really expensive. So just be super aware of how much things can like cost and the budgeting of things, and be true to yourself, because it can get horrifically out of range and like out of your hands so fast. For instance, if you don't have a lot of money and you want a cool V8, for instance, I just bought a circle track engine and it basically rod knocked up on startup, and now I feel like I don't want to toss any more money into the car. You should always have a car that, like, if you have an engine in it, like say a 350Z, you can go find another, 2007, 2008 350Z motor, because they came in so many things, for $1,200 or $1,500. And then you could go buy 3 in a row if you blew them up or something like that. But say you have LS7 and a cool Z06. If you nuke that motor, that's like a $14,000 motor, and I don't even think they make those anymore, which sucks, but you can't buy LS7s anymore new from GM. But could you afford to blow up a second one on startup because you and your friends screw something up? Because I mean, that happens to us all the time, where we just make some dumb mistake, and you need to be able to survive from these mistakes. So if you don't have a lot of money, make sure that you're not overstretching yourself with any parts on these cars, and that the cars are always disposable and you could always fix it, so that you stay way under what you think your budget is. All right, next part. Before we go to the next part, I just had a thought. Let's go through some of these cars real quickly and talk about them. Owning a 350Z in the United States is dumb easy. Super reliable cars. We'll go into the differences between the different 350Zs and 370Zs and stuff, but they're kind of a no-brainer. That's why you go to a lot of events in Texas and you might see 50, 60 of them at one event, and you only see 3 or 4 S chassis now. It's because they're very reliable, they're cheap, most people can operate them, they're pretty idiot proof, good cars. People argue they're not the most exciting, I'll agree with that, but a lot of people, they just want to drive and they find the tandem time on track and everything the exciting part, and they don't want to fight with the car so much. So it's a great chassis. They're still fairly inexpensive for what they are. We'll go through the breakdown of one of those, how much they cost when we talk about the different models, but good cars, fairly inexpensive. They're still on the sweet spot of the depreciation curve compared to a lot of other cars. You can still find a crappy DE for just a few $1,000s. The HRs are more expensive now. You're probably talking $7,000 to $14,000 for a nicely like prepped one that's ready to go. I would still say 350Zs are great. BMWs are getting tough. The 325 models I thought always sucked and didn't have enough power. You could absolutely make them work, and in lots of parts of the world, especially on small tires, wet tracks, things like that, they work well. But in Texas, we got addicted to like E36 M3s that were always $2,000 to $4,000 for decades. Now that those cars are more expensive, I don't really want to drive a 325i. The E36s, if you can buy one that's not in collectible shape, so like it has aftermarket seats that are like little race car seats, maybe it has shitty paint, salvage title, things like that, you can probably still buy one fairly cheaply, especially if it has an angle kit or something like that. A normal E36 M3 buyer just knocks it out of the market for them. You can probably still buy one of those for $8,000 to $12,000. That's still a great car. They're super reliable. They have great parts availability. They come with a great diff. They come with lots of good parts, good transmission, good engine that pops head gaskets all the time. I'm not bitter about that. They're good cars, and at that price, you're still getting a good car. I would still suggest the E36 M3. I just wouldn't buy one for 20 grand, but if you buy one from 0 up to like 12, you're still getting a good car, and it's enjoyable, a good thing. Mustangs, because they're so highly produced in the United States, you have your range of Mustangs. The prices might go all over the place and kind of be willy-nilly, but those cars banged up, if you can find one dented up and stuff, or if you want a nice one, doesn't matter, but there's still so many of those with so many parts. They're still good. I've had multiple Mustangs. Back in the day, we were buying like Coyote engine Mustangs for $5 grand, $6 grand. I think they're more expensive than that. They have terrible steering. For the ones that have the electronic steering racks, I don't like them, but they're incredibly reliable cars once you get up to the Coyote engines. The ones before that had better steering, but crappier motors, so it's kind of a crapshoot. But they're still good cars for American drifting. The FRS, I love the way they handle. They just have really shitty engines and not many people run them, but we have had them be fairly competitive even on big tracks in our Texas Street Legal Series and in Texas when they're piloted super well. There's nothing wrong with these. I think the GR86 looks amazing, and it's a fairly inexpensive car. You can get a GR86 that looks so freaking cool, like done up, like a Rito has a bunch of cool ones and stuff. I think those look amazing, and it's tough because a JZX100 now at this point is an old car. They're not super fast from the factory and stuff, but they literally cost more than a brand new GR86. But of course, it's a turbo JZ. It's apples and oranges. But you just have to start thinking about, I could get a JZX100 if you want something wacky like that, or you can get a GR86 that's brand new with a warranty, which is nuts. Corvettes, we were buying Corvettes for $5 grand back in the day for C6s, $5 to $8 grand for really, really cheap ones. Finding one that cheap was probably difficult, but I know a lot of people that did. Around the $10,000 mark was probably pretty easy to find. Now they're more like $15,000 to $20,000 cars. They're still worth it. They're cool cars. Just know that you kind of need to be mechanically inclined or have a lot of money held back in reserve, because if you have a clutch problem, they have to pull the whole subframe and everything back of the clutch. So from the engine back, everything has to be dropped, which is something you don't have to do on normal cars. So it becomes a pretty in-depth job. And I would imagine anybody that's doing a clutch in that is charging you like $1,500 of labor. I'm not sure, but I'm just guessing. You kind of need a lift for that. It would be miserable to do like in a parking lot or something, which you could do on these other cars. The Corvettes are just more difficult to work on, but they're rad cars and they're really good. And then once you get into like the JZX, they're rare. I wouldn't suggest those for people. They were more of a really cheap, really reliable thing that you'd use in Japan. And now you get them and they're a collector's item. S13s, A86s, those types of cars, it's so hard to find them in good condition now that if you're trying to do one that's stock, it's kind of just like over. But if you found one that was like a Pro-Am build, I have my S14 V8 car with Wisefab and stuff is right behind us. they are such good cars. They last forever. You can make something a complete race car so it's easy to work on. You don't have all of like the street stuff that gets in the way and makes it less reliable or more complicated. They can be really good cars. Just know that you have to have a truck, a trailer, and all these things to operate one of those cars now because they're so dang old. You either get into the point where it's a collector's like car now, which it would kind of suck to destroy and drive to the track and do all these different things. But if you were to get a full race car one, I would still approve, and I personally would drive one of those over a 350Z. I have 4 350Z like Drift Week rental cars that I have, and I never drive them. I always drive my S14 to the V8. And then there's a lot of new cars like the F80 M3 and F82 M4. You can get those in the high 20s to like 40s for salvage title or high mileage or whatever. Those things are pretty freaking amazing. Edwin, one of our drivers, has one. RK Tunes, Jordan has one, and Duarte has one. They're really reliable for the most part. They can just be really expensive when they break. Some of the parts are pretty cheap because nothing else can use them, kind of like Corvette transmissions and stuff. So the parts in the junkyard, such as the diffs and stuff, might only be $400. But if you do need new parts, such as like a axle shaft, you want an OEM one, they're $1,500. The battery's $1,200 or whatever. You can buy used parts for like the axles and get them for like $400. But just know that if you want OEM parts, you are in money territory. But you can make crazy horsepower with those things, like 500 wheel with just downpipes and a tune, stock ECU, stock injectors, all that stuff. So we're getting into a range of like, if you can jump up to that next range of like closer to $30,000, and that's not a finished car, that's just like the base thing, you can buy a lot of really neat stuff that's like super depreciated now and very cool. Problem is newer cars are a lot more expensive than they were 25 years ago when like they were making E36 M3s. These new M3s are so expensive, I don't know if they'll ever get down in the price range we want them and still actually be running. All right, real quickly, I'm gonna just break down some cars for you. So in 2023 and 2024, this is a bit more of an updated thing. Back in like 5 years ago, you could get a DE 350Z for $800 to $3,000, and you get an HR car for $2,000 to like $6,000 or $8,000. So first of all, let me tell you what that means. 350Z is a Nissan 350Z. Everybody that's a drift person probably knows that already. The DE is the 2003 to 2005 to 2006 engines. The 2006 is a specific year, but you don't want that. It's the the rev up motor. They're just rare to get, and the motors are really expensive. So 2003 to 2005 is the DE engine. You can tell because it has just one intake, little runner airbox thing, and the HR has two. This car, they're about $2,000 to $8,000 right now, I think. They make 287 crank horsepower. They rev from like 6.5 to 7,000 RPM. This is stock, and that's with a tune. The gearing is kind of crap because of that. And then all the parts are the same as the HR. The high rev HR motor has two intakes, so it's easy to see, and the bump of the car, or the hood has a bump on it, so easy to tell. They're more like 5 to 15,000. They make somewhere around 305 horsepower. Stock, they make, I think, 7,500 RPM, and tuned, they're like 8 or maybe 7.2 or something, like whatever it is. You can turn it up to 8. And then why I wrote gearing there is because when you turn these up a little bit, they make tuned a good 50 horsepower more than the DE does make tuned, and they have a much more RPM. And that means that when this car is in third gear at a track, this one can stay in second, and it stays, just feels like double the power when you're trying to drift these damn things. You can chew through the same track in second gear as you can third gear on this one. In third gear, these feel so flat. In second gear, these feel like little like monsters. So the HR car is a way better drift car than the DE in my opinion. And because you'll never be able to get the horsepower of this DE up to what the HR is, even if you spend some money, we have some drivers that have done cams, a tune, intake plenum spacers, lots of stuff, and they still do not approach the horsepower of the HR car with just a tune. I highly suggest the HR car. It's not much more money. You get a newer car with updated parts, with an updated engine, with updated transmission, slightly updated styling, probably newer with less wear in the car. It is so much better to get the 2007 to 2008 and completely avoid the 2006 car. So I would highly suggest this. This is like a shitty stock car that maybe has paint falling off. I have bought these for as little as $2,000, but that was 4 years ago. And for 15 grand, you should be able to buy a really nice one, completely prepped and ready to go for drifting. That's what I would suggest. I recently bought an HRZ for 5 grand. I bought 5 or 6 of them, and all of them basically cost 15 by the time we were done with them and they're ready for track. What we did to those cars is every one of them needs an oil gallery or oil galley gaskets behind the timing assembly, up on the heads redone. They all need dual caliper setups for a Hydra handbrake. I like to tune them, but we didn't tune all the cars. They need an angle kit just because it's a lot easier to give them out as rentals if they have steering angles so that people don't spin and crash them. They all have maintenance that needs to be done, alignments, arms in the back, a clutch. So every car we get, we immediately take the transmission off and check the clutch and just replace it because it's a lot easier to replace when you first get it than, you know, when it's out at a track day, when it fails and everybody's mad at you. And then we take the viscous diffs and we buy shims from Nissan and we re-shim the factory diff. And then racing seat, steering wheel. We like the stock shifter. We don't ever change the stock shifter. And then whatever maintenance. These things do kill engines every once in a while if you don't do the gaskets in the heads, and they also kill transmissions, not because they make too much power and break anything, they just wear out the synchros. That's kind of a 350Z. That's how much you should expect to spend. Parts between them, once you get out of the engine, everything's basically the same. I would highly suggest the 2007 to 2008, and I think that's what most people should pick for a drift car, unless, of course, they fit a bunch of other parameters, which is they want to be exciting, they want a JZ car, they want an S chassis because they want something lighter, they want better tire wear, they want this or that. But I think this is the bread and butter of American drifting at the moment, best bang for the buck and all that stuff. Let us do another car. Real quickly, let's break down a more like exciting car that people are really into right now because the 25-year rule lets you import these into the United States, and they're kind of all the rage right now for a lot of people. For a cool factor, the JZX100. They're probably going to cost you somewhere around $25,000 landed in the USA. You might be able to find a beat one for less or a really nice one for more, but I would guess you're going to be in the $25K for a medium one. Parts are expensive for these babies. They are super reliable, but they're also worn out at this point. Remember, these are 25-year-old cars that were owned by Japanese people that may or may not have adequately maintained them, but also wanted them gone and sold them to get money out of them to people that they never have to meet through auctions and stuff. So remember, even if this car is the most reliable thing, the one that you buy is something that someone fed through an auction, so it might not be the best. You're probably going to have $5,000 in maintenance before the thing hits the track. The things that need to be done are bushings, control arms, subframe, diff bushing, stuff like that. That stuff is always worn out. Checking the diff, clutch, flywheel, just things like that. Maybe the turbo smoking, but probably 5K will get you on track. They're pretty cool because they make 300 horsepower at the wheels with a tune and more boost. However, it's a 2.5 liter motor. That's a turbo motor. They are a very small engine. They're a very heavy engine. It's a big engine, but it's small in displacement. So remember that. They sound amazing, rad cars. Researching parts on these things absolutely sucks from America. You will spend so much time figuring out which brake pad combination with which rotor exists on an IS300 in America, with which control arms or something fit. All that stuff is wrong when you search it online, and you'll spend a lot of time screwing with that stuff because you don't want to try and have to get it from Japan a lot of the time, so it's just a big pain. Anytime you do need to order something, I had a valve for my heater core, block-off valve thing, so when you hit the switch, it would turn on the heater in your car. That broke, and I had to basically delete it for a little while so I could drive mine. And it was probably winter time, and I did not have heat in my car for a while, for months. I also recently had to order a bunch of stuff from Russia from a person that parts out JZX90s for my 90. So anyways, waiting time can often be in the months if you have something that breaks that's a Japanese specific car thing, which can be AC components, heat components, windshields, window regulators, door locks, anything like that. All that stuff can take a lot of time. And then the biggest thing for me is anxiety on track with these cars. When these cars were $6,000 and you were tandeming, it was no big deal to crash them to do anything. But if you're into this car for $30,000 and it's like a collector's car, and it's very difficult to get replacement parts such as fenders, doors, glass, anything else, I'm not going to drive hard or confidently, and it's a lot of stress on you. Whereas if I have a car that's made out of like my S chassis that has tons of fiberglass on it that I can get locally, that I can bang up and everything, I wonder if that's how you spell anxiety. I would much rather drive something disposable to a certain extent, or at least fixable. These are not super fixable in the United States, even though they are tough and reliable cars. So this is more of a car that you cruise around now, and is a classic car. It's starting to fall out of the range of being a drift car in the United States because the depreciation curve. And these things are hellishly expensive to modify here if you really want to. If you wanted to make 500 wheel horsepower and have a single turbo with an aftermarket manifold with a standalone ECU and injectors, we just got some injectors from Deutschwerks, and I think they're like $1,200 for that. A nice Arctic manifold's like $1,300 or something like that. A nice Garrett turbo to put on there is, man, $2,200 or something, probably like that. A standalone ECU is probably $2,000 with wiring and all the like sensors and harness stuff. Probably another $500 to $1,000 to get it tuned and be on the dyno. Very quickly, you have $10,000 in engine components. You need a clutch to hold that, LSD and everything else. If you wanted to make any power with this thing and have like a cool modern car, it's really expensive. And you cannot import these from Japan typically with any cool turbos or anything like that, because the Japanese always use really laggy old Greddy turbos or, you know, something else. It's typically not anything that the US guys like or want. Not saying they're bad, because a lot of those turbos are really durable, but most of the time the American guys buy Garrett turbos or Precision or something else, and they're just way more expensive. So immediately you would be in the $50,000 range if you put a cool turbo kit and everything else on here, and like put a body kit and some wheels and stuff on it. So just know that JZX 100s in America are precious, and you probably do not want to drift one if you're tandeming and everything else. I do know people do it, but it is anxiety inducing, and you might get away with it for a long time and have a lot of fun. But it's just a different feeling than driving around a shitbox E36 with your boys in tandem and not worrying about it. Boom. I always kind of do this on my budgeting stuff just for fun, to kind of show you stuff. For that 350Z HR car, we talked about you could buy one completely prepped for 10 to 15. That would come with angle kit, the car, a tune, suspension, dual caliper handbrake, a seat, a steering wheel, and like a clutch, and that's about it. You can have a car that's pretty reliable, drives to the track and stuff, doesn't need a truck and trailer. You probably still have one, but doesn't need one. Let's do a Pro 2 car real quick. So this is just all generic stuff, a Pro 2 E36 build. The chassis, you're probably gonna have 10 grand in it. That's buying a car, prepping it, putting a cage in it, and some fabrication work and stuff for Formula D Pro 2. Probably gonna be 10 grand into the chassis pretty fast. To put a quick change in the rear with axles and the subframe modifications and everything else, if you call up Drift HQ, they're gonna quote you more than 10K for that, probably like 12,000, but that's a starting point. We'll just say 10 to make it easy. An engine that makes 550 wheel horsepower, tuned with everything, with headers, everything ready to go new, so you can depend on the engine, probably somewhere around 20K. That doesn't mean your buddy is building something super cheap or whatever. That's just buying a crate motor that's gonna make that, maybe from Texas Speed or somebody. It's probably gonna actually be more than that, but tuned with headers and all the parts, intake manifold, everything you need is gonna cost that. Dog box with a clutch and everything else, and the bell housing is probably going to be 10,000. Suspension front and rear for everything you need, with spares and stuff, is going to be more than 6,000. Fuel system is going to be 2,000 at the minimum. Body for the hood, fenders, bumpers, everything else, at least 4,000, probably quite a bit more. You're going to have another couple grand in paint and vinyl. Remember, it's going to be way more than that. I know probably most people that do nice vinyl stuff, it's at least $3,000. Testing, the crew, everything else, you immediately are like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000. And then whenever you budget for racing stuff, just double it, because you need, like, it gets super expensive fast. And there are cheaper ways to do this stuff, but it just kind of lays out some of the parts and very simply show you what you're going to be doing and how much you're going to be spending. And that's for a very budget thing with zero labor, maybe just paying a tuner for something. If you include labor and fancy parts or anything else, cool wheels, like say you get some $3,000 wheels set up and then you need 20 of them, it's going to get pretty crazy. So I always like to show people this so they know what the other cars around them cost, so they don't try and go down this route too fast. I have lots of guys in Lone Star Drift Series with dog boxes, with engines that make 550 horsepower. I don't think we have anybody with quick changes right now, but we have lots of people way past this range. There's no problem with that or anything. It's just learning to budget so that you know that you're not going to be doing that. And then if you do have a car like this, every weekend you go out, you're going to be going through 10 to 20 tires, a bunch of fuel, everything else. It's probably going to be no less than $4,000 to $5,000 to take a car out like this and have a lot of fun. My own car, by the way, my S14, it makes 400 wheel. It does not have a dog box. It's a normal transmission. Does have some Wisefab on it. It's a pretty inexpensive car. It would still probably cost $50,000 to replicate. But my expenses for a weekend are 20 gallons of pump gas, 93. So fuel is like, I don't know what that is, $100, let's say. I go through 2 to 4 Valino, 285, 35, 18s. Those are probably like 165 a piece. So I go through 350 to 700, let's say, dollars in tires. And then I do breakage and fuel and transport and stuff. But very quickly you can see only going through 2 to 4 tires an event and the cheapest gas basically possible in this thing, not running a lot. I'm still spending $1,000 in bare minimum consumables without dealing with the truck and trailer, distance, fixing things, body work, paint, breakages of transmissions, all that other stuff. And this season, I think between the Nakamura car that got blown up, one of the rental cars, except I think that was last year, my Circle Track car, the replacement Circle Track car, and another V8 that we were dealing with. I think we had 4 engine failures. That was probably at least $20,000 in motors. So like just mistakes of doing something like that, if you knock that guy out once or your transmission out once, I mean, you are dealing in huge numbers really fast. But I just do want to say, before you think it's always super expensive, my car probably costs in the order of $1,000 a weekend to run before all the trailering expenses and stuff, which is ridiculously cheap for a V8 S14. Okay, so let's finish this video up real quickly. Let's be honest with ourselves. Think about your lifestyle. Do you have a garage? Do you have a truck? Do you have a trailer? Do you have available time for projects? Pick your car according to that. Pick it within your budget. Leave a huge budget range. If you can afford $10,000 to go drifting, you can afford a simulator, or you could, don't be afraid to use a simulator for a long time. You can afford a $4,000 car and then have money in reserve to go drifting for a while. Remember that money and drifting is always recurring. Every time you go drifting, you spend money. Make sure you know you're gonna burn off $1,000 or $500 or whatever it is. You can stay within your own city. If you're a Houston person, you're kind of lucky. There's tons of Houston events. You can go drifting and you don't have to spend hotel money, you know, getting out of city money, all these different things. It can be pretty cheap. Or if you want an amazing experience, like you want to go to Japan, or you want to do Drift Week, or you want to do something overseas, you can spend a ton of money and up your game, and just know what you want to do, because the budgeting, the car is the cheap part. The driving and the traveling and doing everything else gets so expensive. And the traveling is so much a part of this, and like the meeting people and networking and everything else. The car type is super important. Do you want something simple? Do you want something complicated? Do you want something fast? Do you want something slow? Do you want something stylish? Do you want something low? Do you want something high? Think about that, because you're going to get stuck in it. And each of those things requires all these other things. Think about your tracks, think about your mechanical ability. Your mechanical ability will grow depending on what you're having, and you do not need to try and stress your mechanical ability. You do not need to become a fabricator and build from the ground up some crazy car. Be honest with consumables. So simple. Oh, I didn't do the biggest thing on the whole thing. Let's do built or bought real quickly. Oh, I can't believe I just thought of that. Built, should you build it or should you buy it? It is always cheaper to buy it. You should just buy a drift car. You can go, you can test drive it, you can skip years of build time. You should always buy a finished car. Always, basically, unless you know you can do it right and you want it done exactly to what you want. You want it easily repairable. You want it built with the exact parts you want. You want it built in the way and the style. You want it to be a representation of you, then you should build it. But know that this could take years and this could be instant. This you could pre-drive before you buy it at an event, and you can know exactly how good it is. This you could build it for 4 years and hate the thing when you're done. I always suggest buying it. However, you could always buy into someone's fucked up project that sucks, that has tons of problems that you don't realize, with parts that are all at the end of their life, because you still have to know what you're doing if you're buying it. Whereas if you build it, you know what everything is, but you could also blow it up on installation. This is such a hard one. I suggest buying it though. You just zip to the end of the process. You can start driving immediately. You will save at least probably 70 cents on the dollar. Man, buy it. But if you want, you can build it. And if you do buy it, you're probably going to end up rebuilding it anyways. So it is what it is. You get a lot of parts with it. This is such a tough decision. And then one last thing that I want to say is, wow, one of my friends brought this up a long time ago. Race car, in between, stock car. A race car means everything has been built. It was just a shell. Everything was been like put in to make it a race car. All the wiring is race car. There's not one extra wire in that car. Everything is built out of race car components. Everything is simplistic. This does not have some weird engine in it out of a modern car. This is a race car engine. The transmission is a race car transmission. The diff is a race car thing. The axles, there's no extra brake lines, ABS units, anything extra in this car. It is the most simple to work on, to diagnose. There's no like manual you have to go through and figure out all kinds of crazy stuff. This would be, for instance, I have a stock car that's a little tube car, like tube chassis thing. It has a carburetor on it. It has a mechanical fuel pump, has a fuel cell, has a fuel line, has an MSD box. If it breaks, it is so easy to diagnose. Whereas if you had a modern BMW, it could also be easy to diagnose if it was stock car, not a stock cat. But if you haven't, and this is also a great place to be because there is a manual for the car. It's a pretty easy car to do, but be very careful of in-between cars. That means a car that is like full interior with a full wiring harness that's stock, with some other engine that's spliced in, with a stock fuel tank feeding some weird setup with swapped transmission in because the owner wanted a BMW with a 1JZ in it that was streetable with a CD09 transmission, because that's a 350Z transmission, because he was being cheap. So the drive shaft is different. Everything is different, but the car is not a complete race car. These are terrifying cars to work on. You don't know what any part on the car is. Everything's convoluted. You can't get to anything. The whole thing is so difficult to work on and be a part of. Just be very careful of this. If you have, we always say like with a Toyota JZX100, you want that thing to be as stock as humanly possible, because everything that Toyota did is the reliable part. Every single part you change out, you put a different turbo on it, the car gets worse and like less reliable. You go change, like I know people with JZ setups and they go put a CD09 in it it gets significantly worse than the R154 because you're being a cheap bastard. Everything you do to that JZX as you modify it makes it worse because you're buying into that stock Toyota reliability, and you lose that when you modify it. So be really careful. You have race cars, in between cars, and stock cars. You don't want to be here typically. You want a stock car that's easy to replace and repair parts. Everything is available. Everything, like if a 350Z door lock or intake manifold or mass airflow sensor goes out, you can just go look it up and buy that mass airflow sensor. If some dude went and swapped everything, like say it was very popular for a long time for SR cars, you had a car like an S chassis that had an SR swapped in with GTR coil packs with, let's say a Z32 mass airflow sensor with this and that. Every time someone rewires a connection, makes a new plug, changes out a part, retunes the car for those different parts to make it work, each time you try and replace it or figure out what's going on, especially if it's a new buyer, they have no earthly idea what's going on. So be very careful of all that stuff. All right, so buy it. Don't do that. Stock car or race car. If you have a race car, know what that means. Truck, trailer, all this other stuff. I think I've talked enough. I hope this helps you out in the thought process of buying a car in 2023 and 24. Know where you are on the depreciation curve if you're trying to be a collector of a car. Know what you're doing and have a good day. Sorry my videos are so dang long. Goodbye. I'll see you on track.